So, we are on the eve of Alexander Zverev playing his first match as a Grand Slam champion, and boy, does that feel weird to me. We live in a world now, a week old, where Zverev is a major champion, and I will be upfront here and say that I did not get to watch a second of... This is probably the first major final that I've missed entirely since, Australia 2011, I would say. Just racking my brain. Yeah, I think that it's been that long. But that was on account, of course, of the family taking a trip out to Yellowstone. If you're from the States, you've been to any of these national parks, you know the deal. Just gorgeous, picturesque wallpaper scenes everywhere. The peak beauty of, the United States, honestly. But in exchange for being essentially cut off from the outside world, you might as well throw your phone, your electronics into the lake because, for good reason, they're very insistent on sort of just unplugging, taking in everything. No TVs in any hotel rooms, no signal, no Wi-Fi. So it goes without saying, I, of course, did not get to watch any of the final. In fact, my first updates were, texting my friend after I got satellite signal somewhere, just being like, lay it on me, is Zverev a slam champion? And that was when I got the update that Kabuli had just sent at 5. So it goes without saying, I am not going to go out of my way here to analyze the final. I only watched highlights. I'm not really fit to comment on the match, other than the fact that I was very surprised to hear that this match saw a 5th set. My last video, you kind of, I'm sure, got the impression. I kind of felt that, as everybody did, pretty much even once Sinner went down, and then even more so the next day once Djokovic went down, that you really couldn't draw it up any better for Sasha than what had gone down over those 2 days in Roland Garros. A season this year where he has played quite well all season long, and this chaos in the draw happening at a time where Carlos Alcaraz is sidelined. Jannik Sinner, who has had him in prison for the better part of the last 2 years. You get this perfect storm and just unconventional susceptibility to heat that he has that takes him out. And quite frankly, even Djokovic, I would have trusted more. Yes, at 39 years old and on clay, I don't care. But yeah, I mean, after making the semifinals of the last 5 majors, Djokovic finally breaks that streak when Sinner and Alcaraz are not in his path finally. And all of a sudden, that's the elephant in the room, right? Zverev has his best look yet at his best slam. And like I said in my last video, he handled that pressure as the favorite really, really well. It was deja vu, sort of, from the first time he got this look at the US Open in 2020 when he was younger. And unlike that run, unlike a lot of his slam runs, frankly, he didn't get caught up in these tussles where he's playing down to competition in earlier rounds. He was quite clinical. Like I said, I'm not really going to dive into the final itself. From what I understand, what I have read, the highlights and all, seemed like a very, very tight match on both sides. Uncharted territory for both guys in some ways, so you understand that. But yeah, this time around, it's Zverev that comes out on the winning end, wins ugly, and gets that elusive Grand Slam title to sort of just tie together what is a pretty ridiculous resume when you just assess the counting stats, the consistency, the titles. And as obvious as it became, as now or never it became within just like a 24-hour span in week 1 of Roland Garros, I have to say that it just feels so weird. I am stunned that he got it done. Because if you remember, when I made my video on Sinner talking about his spring and the tear through the Masters 1000s, I was actually very much with Zverev in mind, talking about the rest of the field and saying that these guys can do all the right things. They can improve. They can make all these adjustments, max their absolute most out of their potential. And it still might not be enough. It is entirely possible that it's not even close to enough. And I say that, with Zverev in mind because at the end of last year, I was just very up in the air of what do I do with this guy and predicting the future for him, because 2025, yeah, he finished number 3 in the world, but it was genuinely as underwhelming a top 3 season as I have ever seen. And this came out of his own mouth. Just wasn't a good year in like any sort of way, especially after making the Australian Open final. For a couple of months, seemed like he was dejected, seemed like maybe the age was showing a little bit with him getting banged up more throughout the course of the year. And yeah, I mean, against top-flight opposition, other than the Vienna final against Sinner, there really just wasn't much encouraging there. And I was kind of wondering, like, am I leaning in the direction now where he's following suit with his next-gen contemporaries of the 90s guys, like Medvedev, Tsitsipas, of course, to an even greater extent, Rublev? These guys have shown more clear signs of decline, as Zverev also following suit now. And when the year began in 2026, I kind of left the Australian Open on Zverev being like, he should be absolutely thrilled with the level that he showed. I thought that in Australia he was already better, played better than he did at any point in 2025. That includes the final run from Australia 2025. I understand, of course, the Alcaraz cramps in the semifinal opening the door for him and him not really necessarily kicking the door down in the face of that opportunity. But I do think the 5th set of that match sort of vindicated it, where, like, you know, he should have been proud of his effort in that match. He has every right to be. Once Carlos had shaken the cramps a little bit and returned a little bit more to normal service, he was, like, charging real hard throughout the course of the 5th. I thought Zverev did really well to hold him off until, of course, he couldn't. And even before then, looked really good against Tien and Cerundolo, both in form. But the thing is, like, even with tangible improvement, you saw, like, a commitment to be more offensive with his forehand from the jump this year. On clay, you noticed him committing to the drop shot more. Just real nice wrinkles in his evolution now in ways that, you know, it felt like Zverev was very much stylistically in one box, and it was going to be hard to sort of add any sort of layers, but as it turned out, it didn't need to be all that drastic, just little changes here and there, different looks. And the major one, of course, being the forehand. This year definitely has seemed like the most purposefully he has hit that shot. But, of course, after Australia, what happened was, in those 5 Masters runs that Sinner had, 4 of them he beat Zverev, and he beat him in straight sets. And really only one of them felt competitive. It was the Miami semi. Otherwise, he kind of just wiped the floor with him. And the Madrid final in particular was like just an exclamation mark. After that match, actually, I don't think I've ever been more sure on the fact that I thought Zverev's slam window had effectively closed. Because, yeah, that phenomenon of everybody else, the mere mortals, like getting better, doing all the right things, and it not seeming nearly enough, that seemed more applicable to Zverev than anybody else. And I have historically been somebody that, you know, I don't think it's the most fun game in the world to watch, but I have pretty consistently felt that Zverev definitely can win a major. One of my earlier videos, early days of this channel in 2021, after he won the gold medal, was just expressing how confusing a player he is to me, with just the dichotomy and all these dynamics, particularly regarding the clutch, where it's like he's from a very early age, in fact from teenage years, he's had a bunch of marquee wins in best of 3. Dichotomy best of 3 versus best of 5. Dichotomy in scoreboard pressure. I don't think I'd ever seen an elite player just be so predictably prone and visibly affected in their play by different match situations, particularly just tightening up with finish line pressure. You get the idea. And last year, when he said at the podium in the runner-up speech against Sinner in Australia, is like, I'm not good enough. I thought that was sort of a cop-out. I thought To me, that was throwing himself bail after a very, very substandard performance in the final. Because up until last year, really, Zverev very consistently throughout his career, especially since he's gotten into this period where I think he was actually ready to win a slam. I would say that was 2021 and on, once he fixed the second serve issues. And there was a little bit of this going on as well before then, but pre-2021, there was a lot more separation in between what you were going to get best of 3 and at slams. Through much of that period, he was a pretty consistent slam underperformer. But even then, consistently, you saw him against the elites, the tier 1 guys of the game. Early on in his career to that point, it was still older Big 3, and in particular the back end of Djokovic, Nadal, that he overlapped with. And for those older versions of Big 3, he was consistently a pain in the ass to play because just as the younger guy, he loved to make things physical. He could get to the legs of these older versions of great champions, and they sort of had to go to their arsenal to just outmaneuver him, sort of. And oftentimes he helped out as well because, for lack of a better way of putting it, I mean, we all saw it. He would do a lot of good work to put himself in position to where the result would be teetering a little bit, and once victory, a path to victory actually seemed in sight, he would sort of shrink. And that became the question over the years, is he ever going to be able to conquer those nerves? Because, yeah, I mean, consistently, 2021 and on, and this was still the case into 2024 when the Tier 1 opposition transitioned into Sinner Alcaraz. In between then, of course, shout out to him. It can get lost over time how well he's done, how resilient he's been in bouncing back from what was a traumatic injury. Took 1 year to fully recover. 2024 picked right up where he left off. I mean, back end of 2023, actually, right before Sinner goes on this tear and announces himself as this world beater, Zverev beats him in 5 at the US Open. You hear that 5 and 19 get tossed around at slams, right? It's telling of his underperformance in slams. But you remember his first win? It was the Roland Garros quarterfinal in 2022. It was over Alcaraz. 2024, he did it again, beat Alcaraz in Australia. They play again a couple months later in the final of Roland Garros in 2024. A Carlos status far from 100% at that point. Again, it felt like there was a little bit of a lack of killer instinct shown after he stole the third to go up 2-1. Guy on the other side of the net has killer instinct in bucket loads. Snatch that away from him, and we play Sinner again later that summer. It's a 7-6, 5-7, 7-6 type deal. Point being, nothing had changed. It was still a matter of, can Zverev be clutch enough? He can still hang with these guys. He had done it several times on huge stages. But then 2025 comes around, and I mentioned, I felt like this was a really poor Zverev year. I felt like there were signs maybe that this could be the start of decline. And what happens on the other side, conversely? Alcaraz and Sinner both leveled up, and it spelled just absolute dominance, unprecedented dominance, really, by a duopoly over the course of a full season. And everyone else, sort of faded to the back. You were an afterthought. And Zverev himself, he needed to be the absolute best version of himself in 2025. He was far from it. So we got to 2026. I've told you guys I was very impressed with his level from the jump. But then 4 months into the year, somehow it feels like he's further away from ever winning a slam than he ever has been since that point, 2020, 2021, where I felt like he was actually ready to do it. Because, yeah, he made these marginal improvements. Guess what? Sinner Alcaraz got better on a good bit more drastic scale. All of a sudden, literally none of that mattered. It was no longer Zverev's tennis can stay with them. For the first time, I truly felt it's not in his hands anymore. It felt to me like the ship had sailed. Because it's one thing with generational all-time great players that you're a decade younger than. Those guys, even still, very productive, great versions of themselves, elite post-prime versions of themselves. Still post-prime, no less. You could still envision a way through if Zverev could just show the cojones, the stones, to thread the needle. In this landscape, it became... These guys are much younger than Zverev, for one, and two, they are just really entering their primes. Yeah, he could still stick with them in 22, 23, 24, but we probably should have known that wasn't going to be the case for long. Those versions he was sticking with, probably the worst that Sinner Alcaraz will be for a long, long time. Because, yeah, they are just of that ilk. They are all-time great generational players. They are the aliens. So considering that, it is just unbelievable to me that in one fell swoop, everything just broke open like this. And again, maybe I shouldn't be, because this is the reward you get. As Zverev so eloquently put it many years ago, that much memed tennis TV clip that I put myself in there. Ironically enough, this slam is very much a product of Zverev just putting himself in the mix over and over again. Because while it is the case that these guys are ascending, Sinner and Alcaraz, they are future already legends, sort of, the fact is, there's only two of them. And I know I felt it, especially over the last year and a half. It felt as Big 3, Big 4-ish, as a foregone conclusion, as like everybody else, like you guys can take off. You are playing as far as it gets until you play one of these guys, but ultimately it's going to be some combination among them for who is taking the title. And in the sense of being a foregone conclusion, Sinner Alcaraz very much had that feel for the last year and a half. But at the end of the day, it's only two of them. It opens up a situation like this where one of them could get hurt, and that drastically just changes the math on things. Not to mention, there's not an Andy Murray equivalent, where it's just there's a guy that's head and shoulders above everybody else, but just missing that little something extra. It's just enough to have some separation between him and the aliens. The closest probably would be Zverev himself in that spot right now, and with all due respect, he is not that caliber of Andy Murray. There's no Wawrinka. Tier 2, of course, drastically weaker, where your top 10 has just sort of transitioned, with a lot of 90s guys declining. Zverev, to his credit, as it turned out, demonstrated by 2026, still treading water just fine, but transitioning into some of the younger guys that are looking to fill those spots. A lot of them have been injured. Draper, Feast this year, and everybody else just really subject to a lot of inconsistency, even the faces in that top 10 at the moment. All that to say, the iron fist of Sincaraz has felt every bit as firm in this smaller sample size, particularly over the year and a half. But for something like this to go down of Roland Garros 2026 and how the draw just sort of unraveled, I think very much an encapsulation of that phenomenon where it's like the dominoes can fall more easily because there's only two of them. And yeah, Zverev, to his credit, we heard the entirety of this tournament really once those 2 days happened where Sinner Djokovic went out back-to-back. This felt like US Open 2020. I have heard the final talked about where it was such tight tennis. Also a parallel to the US Open 2020 final. It was very much role reversal where it was Zverev in the team spot, a guy still in the thick of his prime, had built up this whole like array of experience, you know, of a long-standing just staple really in the top 5, but also an accumulation, of course, of scar tissue as we've talked about in these big matches. Potentially never seeing a better opportunity than this one. Of course, team cut it much closer, but ultimately both in a way in those finals, you know, averted disaster. And ultimately, yeah, doesn't have to be pretty. Got over the line, and really for Zverev's purposes, that's all that matters. It validates and bolsters up, as I sort of brushed over earlier, what has been easily, as far as accomplishments are concerned, counting stats, what was the best slamless career ever moves up into right there with the best one slammers in probably Roddick, Medvedev. Seen a lot of chatter, of course, with the Medvedev comps, even Wawrinka comps. Not gonna say my piece there, but obviously bottom line is, with what his resume is with a slam title now, makes for a lot of interesting convos. You got a slam now, you got 7 Masters 1000s, 2 World Tour finals, gold medal. Honestly, if he doesn't get injured at RG 2022, even losing that match if he does, a very good chance the rest of that season to touch #1 at some point. Probably was his only real shot to get it. Last year he could have with a really big spring with center sidelined, but he was basically going to have to be perfect, and he of course was well short of that last spring. Of course, the landscape being what it is now, I feel like the ship has sailed on #1. That will probably require winning multiple slams. And on that, I have always thought, actually, in 2020, I've kind of wondered why Zverev was slamless all these years. I didn't think Zverev was at all ready, even that late in 2020, US Open 2020. The second serve still would get, like, very, very wobbly. We all know, famously in the breaker, what was a 6-all when he spun one in at, like, 67 miles an hour. There were a bunch of bad doubles. That was still a very blatant Achilles heel for him. And really, throughout that US Open 2020 run, it's one of the worst slam final runs I've ever seen. I don't even care who he beat. It's just, I think that he only won 1 match in straight sets. Was down like a set and a break to Coric, was down 2 sets to love to Carreno Busta. I didn't at all think he was ready to win that slam. But he was obviously so close to doing so. And again, it's like the sort of mental dichotomy that I talked about, where it was like, he played so poorly in the lead up to that final. Team played so well. He was a pretty overwhelming favorite going into that final. And it felt like that freed Zverev up, honestly. Of course, until the finish line was in sight, where he just completely seized up. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. I wondered about that match. If Zverev had found a way to pull through, is he moving forward as vulnerable, as fragile at times, as he has been throughout his career since, in real life, in the timeline that we actually lived out? Because obviously the scar tissue just built and built after that. And yeah, especially that time frame where from the point that I did feel he was ready, 2021, 2024, I definitely was like, yeah, I could see it. Funny enough, he got his best chance to this point when I still felt he wasn't ready. And I have seen a little bit of discussion about that since he won now. It feels like maybe he got the monkey off the back. Maybe moving forward he can play with a little bit more freedom. He has maybe a little different attitude and belief now in these pressure situations. And maybe that is the case. Even if you get the absolute best case turnaround for Zverev here on the other side of winning a first major, it still hasn't really changed how I felt after that Madrid final. I still feel like it's not really going to matter. Just because of the circumstances now where, yeah, the guys that are ahead of him in the hierarchy, the 2 of them, they're younger. And you know who they are as tennis players. It doesn't really feel anymore that mentality is really the big separator there. Or at least can, like, bridge the gap enough. But like I said, there's just 2 of them. We may see more situations yet like this until that dynamic at the top shifts. And that stuff indeed can change super fast. But to Zverev's credit, he has been knocked down a lot over the course of these 2020s. Mentally, big picture, it already could have gone the long way. He already could have been too dejected and not continued to put in the hard yards. Even after the big, ankle injury, his body's clock could have been running out. It seemed at times like maybe that's the start of what we were getting last year. But he has been incredibly resilient. He has been more flexible to change this season. And yeah, in another second year running where the rest of the top 10 after Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, who has been playing more and more a limited schedule as the years go on, where the other guys, there's a lot of unreliability, there's a lot of inconsistencies. Zverev has found a way to keep himself relevant at the top, to keep himself in the mix. This year has been very, very representative as such. There was no title going back to Munich last year, but honestly, there was so much more inconsistency last year. This year, he has just been in like semifinal after semifinal, seemingly every event, I think, other than Acapulco and Rome. Otherwise, he has just consistently been a fixture at the back end of these tournaments. And again, like this top 10 being as unreliable as it is, yeah, Zverev didn't beat any top 10 players at this event. I think in general, throughout the course of the year, I'm not sure he's beaten a top 10 player yet this season. But oftentimes that has been because he has been the only representation of the top 10 outside of the aliens, among the elites. And this time, everything breaks right. He's the only one of the elites, period, there at the end of the tournament. And it happened to be at his best slam. So, I mean, yeah, what a crazy road to get here it's been. The fact that it has happened, I feel like when, or at least right around when, the chances for a Zverev slam seemed the most bleak. Yeah, you never know what the tennis gods have waiting around the corner. But what we do know is in this sport, consistency, persistence, resilience, all the driving factors behind this Zverev Roland Garros win, those qualities are all typically rewarded. And in this case, it falls into place for Alexander Zverev finally capturing the ultimate goal, the ultimate prize in this sport of winning a Grand Slam. But that'll do it for this video. I know it's been a week since this final. We've already turned the page onto grass. So many of you might not be interested in hearing about Roland Garros still now. Of course, I didn't actually watch the match, and turned out I had more to say than I expected, because I was really only going to be talking about this big picture. But if you did make it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching. Like I said in my last video, I have a Rafa 40th birthday video coming up. I'm going to try to get that out in the next couple of days, at latest at the end of this week. If that's up your alley, sit tight for that. But thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.